Aliens found a human warship buried on Mars, then its engines started. Best HFY Sci-Fi Stories. The red dust of Mars had not moved in over 300 years. That was what the old maps said. That was what every survey drone had reported since the Thesari Coalition first sent probes into this dead solar system. Nothing here but rust-colored rock, thin cold air, and the bones of a species long gone silent. Dr. Sayla Mern did not believe that anymore. She stood at the edge of a deep crater on the northern plains of Mars, her breath fogging inside her environment suit. The suit was gray and blue, marked with the small circular symbol of the Thesari Xenoarchaeology Division. Around her, 6 other scientists moved slowly across the crater floor, scanning the ground with handheld devices that beeped and blinked in the weak sunlight. "Doctor, you need to see this," said a voice in her ear. It was Ren, her youngest assistant, still eager after only 2 years in the field. Sayla walked toward him, her boots crunching on the dry soil. He was crouched near a strange ridge of rock that rose out of the crater floor like the spine of some buried beast. "What is it?" she asked. "The scanner says this isn't rock," Ren said. "It's metal. Old metal. But it's shaped too well to be natural. Look at the lines." Sayla knelt beside him and ran her gloved hand along the ridge. He was right. The surface was smooth in some places and ribbed in others, following a pattern too regular for wind and dust to have made. She pulled out her own scanner and pointed it at the structure. The readout made her stop breathing for a moment. The SIF. The metal was a compound alloy the Coalition had never cataloged before. It was old, older than anything they had found on Mars so far, and it was massive. The scanner could not find the edges of it. Whatever this thing was, it went deep into the ground and stretched far beyond the crater in both directions. "Call the ship," Sayla said quietly. "Tell Commander Dax we found something big." 6 hours later, 3 orbital cutters descended through the thin Martian atmosphere and landed near the crater. Commander Threll Dax stepped out first, tall and broad-shouldered, his armor plated in the deep green of the Thesari Coalition military. He did not smile much, and today was no different. "Dr. Mern," he said, walking up to her, "your message said you found a structure. My superiors want to know if this is worth diverting resources from the mining survey." Sayla handed him a data slate showing the scan results. "Commander, look at the size of it. This isn't a building. It isn't a ruin from any species we know. The alloy composition alone should tell you something is very wrong here." Dax studied the slate for a long moment. His eyes narrowed. "This reads like a hull, a ship hull." "That's what we think too," Sayla said. "But no ship should be this big. Whatever it is, it's at least 4 kilometers long, based on the ground-penetrating scans. And it's buried under decades, maybe centuries, of dust and rock." Dax handed the slate back to her. 4 kilometers. "Doctor, the largest ship in the Coalition fleet is under 2 kilometers. Nothing builds ships this size. Not us, not the Varan Trade Combine, not even the old Skarn Empire at its height. There's one species that might have," Sayla said carefully. Dax's jaw tightened. He knew what she meant before she said it. "Humans," she said. "This system was theirs, once, before the silence." The word hung in the cold Martian air between them. Every species in known space had heard of the silence. 280 years ago, a species calling themselves humans had been expanding rapidly through this part of the galaxy, colonizing worlds, building fleets, making both friends and enemies among the older powers. And then, without warning, all human transmissions stopped. Every colony went dark. Every ship vanished from long-range sensors. Scout missions sent to human worlds found them empty, some untouched, some scorched, none of them offering a clear answer. The Coalition history books simply called it the silence, and moved on, treating humanity as a cautionary tale about a species that grew too fast and collapsed under its own weight. No one had ever found human wreckage this large. No one had ever found a human warship at all, buried or otherwise. Most Coalition scholars believed human military technology had been lost, along with the species itself. "If this is human," Dax said slowly, "then Coalition law requires full military oversight of the site. No civilian excavation without an armed escort, and a command officer present at all times." "I understand," Sayla said. "But Commander, I want to be honest with you. I don't think we should touch this at all." Dax looked at her, surprised. Why not? This could be the greatest archaeological find in Coalition history. Human technology, intact, after 3 centuries. Every research division in the Coalition would want a piece of this. That's exactly why I'm worried, Sayla said. We know almost nothing about what happened to the humans. We know their worlds went silent. We don't know why. What if this ship is part of the reason? What if it's dangerous? Dax was quiet for a moment, looking out over the crater at the long ridge of buried metal stretching into the red horizon. We'll proceed carefully, he said finally. But we will proceed. The Coalition Science Council already has the report. They want answers, Doctor, and so do I. The excavation began 3 days later. Heavy digging drones arrived from the orbital cutters, their treads grinding over the dusty plain. Sayla had argued for a slow, careful dig, layer by layer, the way any responsible archaeologist would want. Dax's superiors, eager for results, pushed for speed instead. A compromise was reached. The drones would clear the surface dust quickly, but hand tools and careful scanning would be used once they reached the hull itself. Sayla watched from a raised platform as the drones worked. Clouds of red dust rose into the thin air and drifted slowly back down, never quite settling the way dust would on a planet with real weather. Hour after hour, more of the buried structure came into view. It was not just a ridge. It was the curved back of something enormous, something built with purpose, something built to survive. By the end of the first week, the drones had cleared enough dust to reveal a section of hull, nearly 200 meters long. Sayla walked along the exposed metal with Ren and 2 other researchers, running scanners over every meter, cataloging every mark and seam. These aren't just plates, Ren said, crouching to examine a row of small vents along the hull. This looks like an engine housing, a big one. Sayla nodded slowly. If the size estimate is right, this could be a capital ship. A warship built for real combat, not just patrol duty. Do you think it's still whole? Ren asked. Or is this just wreckage? Something that crashed, or got shot down? Sayla didn't answer right away. She walked closer to the hull and placed her gloved hand against the cold metal. There were no visible breaks, no signs of battle damage, no scorch marks from weapons fire. The hull looked intact, almost as if it had been buried on purpose rather than destroyed. I don't think this crashed, she said quietly. I think someone buried it here, deliberately. That thought stayed with her all through the following weeks. As the dig continued, more of the ship emerged from the Martian soil. It was, in fact, closer to 4.5 kilometers long, a shape unlike anything in the Coalition's records, sleek in some places, heavily armored in others, with long weapon emplacements running down both sides of the hull like ribs. Near what appeared to be the front of the vessel, the researchers found strange markings, a language none of them could read. Sayla photographed every symbol and sent them back to the Coalition's linguistic archives, hoping for a match against old human data. The archives held very little. Humanity's written language, its culture, its history, almost none of it had survived the centuries since the silence. What little existed came from a handful of abandoned colonies studied decades ago, and even that data was incomplete. Commander Dax grew more tense with each passing day. More soldiers arrived from orbit, setting up a perimeter around the dig site. Sensors were placed at regular intervals, watching for any sign of activity from the buried ship. So far, there had been nothing. No power readings, no heat signatures, no signs of life. The vessel appeared as dead as the planet itself. It's just a tomb, Dax said one evening, standing beside Sayla as the pale Martian sun set behind distant hills. Whatever crew it had, they're long gone, if they ever existed at all. Maybe, Sayla said, but something about this still doesn't feel right to me. You've said that before. I'll keep saying it until I understand why, she replied. During those same weeks, word of the discovery spread far beyond the small camp on Mars. The Coalition Science Council, based on the capital world of Thesser Prime, sent daily requests for updates. Sayla found herself writing long reports late into the night, trying to explain findings that she barely understood herself. Other Coalition species began to take notice as well. A delegation from the Varan Trade Combine sent a formal request to visit the site, hoping to study any technology that might be useful for their shipping fleets. The request was denied. Commander Dax made it clear that, for now, this was a Coalition military matter, not open to outside eyes. Not everyone agreed with that decision. Councillor Habron Yeth, an older Thessari politician known for his caution, argued in a recorded message that the ship should be left alone entirely. "We know almost nothing about why the humans vanished," he said. His voice carried through the small speaker in the camp's meeting tent, as Sayela and Dax listened. "For all we know, this ship carries the very reason for their fall. I urge the council to seal this site and walk away." But other voices on the council were louder and hungrier. A ship 4 kilometers long, built by a species advanced enough to travel the stars faster than the coalition itself, was too great a prize to leave buried. The council voted to continue the excavation, with strict military oversight, and ordered Dax to report any unusual activity immediately. Sayela did not know which side she agreed with. Some mornings, walking across the cold red dust toward the exposed hull, she felt only excitement, the thrill of touching history no living being had seen before. Other mornings, she felt a quiet dread she could not shake, a sense that they were waking something that had been left to sleep for a very good reason. Ren, for his part, seemed to feel only the excitement. He spent long hours cataloging the strange human symbols they found scattered through the ship, comparing them against what little data the Coalition archives held. Late one night, he came to Sayela's tent, his eyes bright with discovery. "I think I found a pattern," he said, spreading a data slate across her small desk. "These marks near the corridors, the ones we thought were just decoration, I think they're numbers. A numbering system for different sections of the ship." Sayela leaned over the slate, studying the marks he had highlighted. "If you're right, we might be able to figure out which parts of the ship are which: living quarters, storage, weapons, command." "That's what I'm hoping," Ren said. "Doctor, do you really think there could be humans out there still, somewhere, hiding?" Sayela considered the question carefully before answering. "I don't know. The silence covered every human world we know of. But this ship, it wasn't destroyed. It was buried, carefully, by someone who wanted to protect it. That takes planning. That takes people." Ren was quiet for a moment. "Then maybe they're not gone. Maybe they're just waiting, like this ship was." Sayela did not answer that. She only looked back down at the data slate, at the strange human numbers glowing faintly in the tent's dim light, and wondered what kind of species would go to such lengths to hide their own strength. The soldiers stationed at the perimeter grew restless as the weeks passed. Guard duty on a dead planet, watching over a ship that showed no signs of life, was tedious work, and more than one young trooper complained to Dax about the assignment. Dax did not relax the guard rotation, no matter how many complaints he received. He had fought in 2 border conflicts before this posting, and something about the silence of this place put him on edge in a way he could not fully explain to his own soldiers. He kept extra sensor drones flying constant patrols above the dig site, watching for anything: heat, movement, unusual signals that might suggest they were not as alone here as they believed. Nothing came. Day after day, the readings stayed flat and lifeless, and slowly, even Dax's caution began to soften into routine. It was easy, after enough quiet weeks, to start believing that the ship truly was nothing more than an enormous grave, a monument to a species that no longer existed. 2 weeks later, they found the entrance. It was not a doorway in the way the researchers expected. There was no hatch, no airlock, nothing that looked like an obvious way inside. Instead, they found a section of hull that was slightly different from the rest. A smoother panel, roughly 30 meters across, set into the side of the ship, near what they now believed was the vessel's midsection. Scans showed a hollow space behind it, a corridor of some kind, empty and dark. Dax ordered a full team assembled before any attempt was made to open it. Engineers studied the panel for days, mapping its edges, testing its tageage. No, they tested its material carefully, worried about traps or automated defenses that might still be active after centuries of dormancy. They found none. No power signatures, no moving parts, nothing that suggested the panel could still function on its own. Finally, after nearly a month of digging and studying, Sayela stood with Dax and a team of 6 soldiers in front of the panel, ready to open the first human warship anyone from the Coalition had ever found. "Once we open this," Dax said, "there is no going back. Whatever is inside, we deal with it as a Coalition operation. Understood?" Sayela nodded, though her stomach was tight with a feeling she could not quite name. It was not quite fear. It was something closer to the feeling of standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that whatever lay beyond it would change everything she thought she understood. The engineers used a cutting tool to slowly work through the seam around the panel. It took nearly 6 hours. When the last cut was finished, 4 soldiers used a hydraulic lift to pull the panel free. It came loose with a groan of metal that had not moved in centuries, revealing a dark corridor stretching away into the ship's interior. Cold air, real air, trapped and preserved somehow, rushed out past them, carrying with it a smell like old metal and dust. Sayla stepped forward first, her handheld light cutting through the darkness. The corridor was tall enough for a large being to walk through comfortably, with walls made of the same dark alloy as the hull. There were markings along the walls, more of the unreadable human script, and faint outlines of what might have once been lighting fixtures, now dark and silent. No power readings, one of the engineers said, checking his scanner. This section is completely dead. Whatever kept the air in here, it wasn't active machinery. This place has just been sealed for a very long time. They moved deeper into the ship over the following days, mapping corridor after corridor, room after room. They found what looked like crew quarters, rows of small chambers with simple furniture, all covered in a fine layer of dust that had somehow drifted in despite the seal. They found storage rooms filled with containers, their contents long since decayed or unidentifiable. They found what appeared to be a mess hall, tables and benches arranged in neat rows, as if the crew had simply stood up and walked away one day, never to return. There were no bodies, not one, in all the rooms they searched. Sayla found this more unsettling than if they had found the ship full of the dead. Wherever the crew had gone, they had left in an orderly way, taking their dead, or their living, with them. They evacuated, she said to Dax one night, standing in what they believed was an officer's quarters. Look at this room. Personal items are missing. The bed is made. Whoever lived here packed up and left on purpose. Then where did they go? Dax asked. And why bury the ship afterward? Sayla didn't have an answer, but she had a growing suspicion, one that kept her awake at night in her small quarters back at the base camp. She began to believe that the burial of this ship was not an accident of time, not something the Martian dust had simply done over centuries. She believed someone had buried it on purpose, hidden it, protected it, perhaps preparing for a day when it would be needed again. 3 months into the excavation, they reached what the ship's layout suggested was its command center, a massive circular room near the vessel's heart, filled with dark control panels and rows of dead screens. It was here, standing in the center of that silent room, that Sayla Mirren made a discovery that would change everything. Behind a section of wall panel, hidden and sealed separately from the rest of the ship's systems, her scanner detected something the others had not found anywhere else in the vessel. A power source, small and impossibly still active. She stared at the reading for a long moment, her heart beginning to race inside her suit. 300 years, and something inside this ship was still drawing power, still holding on, still waiting. "Commander," she said, her voice tight, "you need to see this." Dax crossed the room quickly, and when he saw the reading on her scanner, his expression changed from mild concern to something much closer to alarm. "That's not possible," he said. "Nothing stays powered for 300 years. "Human technology might," Sayla said quietly. "We don't know what they were capable of. We never really did." Neither of them spoke for a long moment, both staring at the small, steady pulse of energy hidden deep within the heart of the ship, a heartbeat that should not have existed, in a vessel that should have been nothing but a grave. Dax called for his engineers at once, and within the hour, a full team had gathered around the sealed panel Sayla had found. They worked carefully, unwilling to risk damaging whatever lay behind it, scanning every centimeter before making a single cut. The panel itself was different from the others in the ship, made of a denser material, set with a kind of lock none of them recognized. It looked less like a door and more like a vault, built to keep something safe rather than simply to close off a room. "Do we open it?" one of the engineers asked, looking to Dax for the order. Dax hesitated. He glanced at Sayla, who was still staring at the small, steady reading on her scanner, and then at the soldiers standing quietly along the walls, their weapons held a little tighter than before. "Not tonight," Dax said finally. "I want a full security team here, before we go any further. Whatever this is, we do this right." Sayla did not argue, though part of her wanted to press forward immediately, driven by the same hunger for answers that had brought her to this cold, dead planet in the first place. She understood Dax's caution. She shared it, even as her curiosity burned brighter with every passing hour. That night, back in her tent, she could not sleep. She lay awake, staring at the low fabric ceiling, thinking about the ship lying silent and enormous beneath the Martian dust, about the crew who had vanished without leaving a single body behind, about the small, patient pulse of power that had waited 300 years for someone to find it. Somewhere outside, the wind moved thin dust across the surface of the planet, the same wind that had covered this ship for centuries, hiding it from a galaxy that had long since decided humanity was gone and forgotten. Sayla closed her eyes and tried to imagine the people who had built this vessel, who had sealed it shut and walked away, trusting that someday, someone would need it again. She did not know, as she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, that deep within the ship's silent heart, the smallest thread of light had just begun to strengthen, following instructions written into its systems long before the silence ever came. Somewhere in the dark, dormant circuits were beginning to remember what they were built for. And on the surface above, none of them yet understood that the countdown had already begun. By morning, the camp had changed. What had been a slow, careful archaeological dig now felt like a military operation. More soldiers arrived overnight, landing in 3 heavy transports that kicked up clouds of red dust across the plain. Commander Dax walked among them, giving orders in a clipped, focused voice that Sayla had not heard from him before. Gone was the patient officer who had allowed her weeks of careful excavation. In his place stood a man preparing for something he could not fully explain, even to himself. Sayla stood near the entrance to the ship, watching the new soldiers set up additional sensor equipment around the sealed vault they had found the night before. She had barely slept, her mind circling again and again around the small, steady pulse of power hidden behind that thick metal panel. Ren stood beside her, looking just as tired, his eyes fixed on the same spot. "Do you think it's a weapon?" he asked quietly. "Something they hid on purpose, in case the ship was ever found?" "I don't know," Sayla admitted. "But if it were a weapon, why would it need power for 300 years? A weapon can sit quiet until it's needed. This is something else, something that has to stay running." "Like a heart," Ren said. Sayla looked at him. "Yes, like a heart." By midday, Dax gave the order to open the vault. A team of 6 engineers worked carefully around the sealed panel, using scanning tools to map every possible connection point before cutting anything. They found no obvious traps, no hidden defenses, nothing that suggested the vault was designed to hurt anyone who opened it. Still, Dax insisted on full protective measures. Every soldier in the command room wore heavy armor. Sayla and Ren were given protective suits as well, though neither of them was allowed near the vault until the soldiers confirmed it was safe. The cutting took almost 3 hours. When the final seal broke, a soft hiss of air escaped from around the edges of the panel, and the whole room seemed to hold its breath. The panel slid open on its own, smooth and silent, as if it had only been waiting for someone to ask. Inside was not a weapon. It was a room, small compared to the rest of the ship, lined with softly glowing panels that had clearly not been active a moment before. In the center stood a tall cylinder of dark glass, filled with a faintly glowing blue light. Around its base, thin cables ran into the floor and walls, connecting it to systems throughout the rest of the vessel. "Careful," Dax said, holding up a hand to stop the soldiers from moving forward too quickly. "Scan it first." The lead engineer, a young Thessari named Corvus, ran his scanner slowly over the cylinder. His eyes widened as the readings came back. "Commander, this isn't a weapon system," he said. "It's a processing core, a very advanced one. I think this might be some kind of artificial mind." Sayla felt a chill run through her despite the warmth of her suit. "An AI," she said. "They built a ship with its own mind." "Is it active?" Dax asked. Corvus checked his readings again. "Not fully. It's drawing power, holding some kind of low-level standby state. But Commander, the readings are climbing." "Slowly, but they're climbing. I think our presence here might be waking it up." Dax's hand moved instinctively toward the weapon at his side. "Can you shut it down?" "I wouldn't recommend it," Corvus said carefully. "We don't understand this system." If we try to force a shutdown and get it wrong, we could damage something critical, or trigger some kind of automatic defense we don't know about. Dax was silent for a long moment, looking at the glowing cylinder, at the soft blue light pulsing gently within the dark glass. Then he turned to Sayla. "Doctor, this is your area. What do you recommend?" Sayla stepped closer to the cylinder, her scanner in hand, studying the readings scrolling across its small screen. Her heart was pounding, but her mind was already working through the problem the way it always did when faced with something new and strange. "I think we observe," she said finally, "carefully. We don't touch it. We don't try to interact with it directly. Not yet. We watch, we record everything, and if the power levels keep climbing, we prepare to evacuate the ship entirely, rather than risk provoking it." Dax nodded slowly. "Agreed. Corvus, set up full monitoring on this room. I want eyes on that thing every second, day and night. And get me a direct line to Coalition Command. They need to know what we found." Over the following 2 days, the readings from the strange cylinder continued to climb, slow and steady, like a fire building strength before bursting into full flame. The soft blue glow inside the glass grew brighter. Faint sounds began to come from deep within the ship, low humming noises that traveled through the metal walls and floors, felt more than heard. Sayla spent almost every waking hour in the command room, watching the readings, trying to understand what they meant. She brought in every piece of human data the Coalition archives held, searching for any clue about artificial minds, about how humans had built and used them. The information was frustratingly thin. Humanity had clearly used some form of advanced computing in their ships and colonies, but nothing in the old records suggested minds as complex as what they were watching wake up before them now. "It's more than a computer," she told Dax on the second night, both of them standing in the dim light of the command room, watching the cylinder pulse steadily brighter. "Look at the pattern of the power increase. It's not linear. It's adjusting itself, testing different systems, almost like it's remembering how to be awake." "You think it's alive," Dax said. "I think it might be something close to alive," Sayla replied. "A mind built to run this entire ship, maybe even to make decisions on its own, without a human crew present." Dax rubbed a hand across his face, tired in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. If it wakes up fully, what happens then? Sayla did not have an answer to that. Neither of them did. On the third day, everything changed. It began with the lights. All across the ship, in corridors that had been dark and silent for 300 years, faint illumination began to flicker on, section by section, following some internal pattern only the ship itself understood. Soldiers patrolling the outer corridors reported the change immediately, their voices tight with alarm over the comm channels. "Command, this is Team 4. We have lighting activation in Corridor 7. Repeat. Lights are coming on around us." "Command, Team 2, same here. Corridor 12. The whole section just lit up." Dax moved fast, ordering all non-essential personnel to withdraw toward the main entrance, while keeping a core team near the command room to monitor the situation. Sayla refused to leave, arguing that she needed to be present to understand what was happening, and after a brief, tense argument, Dax allowed her to stay, though he assigned 2 soldiers to remain at her side at all times. The humming sound grew louder throughout the ship, resolving slowly into something more structured, almost like a heartbeat given form in metal and cable. In the command room, the cylinder's glow had grown so bright that it lit the entire chamber in soft blue light, casting long shadows across the walls. "Power levels are still rising," Corvus reported, his voice tight with tension as he watched his instruments. "We're at 40% of what I estimate is full operational capacity. Commander, at this rate, it could reach full power within hours." "And then what?" Dax asked. "I don't know," Corvus admitted. "Nothing in our data prepares us for this." Sayla stood close to the cylinder, watching the light pulse in slow, steady waves, feeling an odd sense of connection to it, despite everything her scientific training told her to feel instead. Caution, fear, professional distance. Instead, watching that light grow stronger, she felt something closer to witnessing a birth, or perhaps a very long-delayed awakening. "It's not attacking us," she said quietly. "If it wanted to hurt us, it's had every opportunity. It's just waking up. Slowly, carefully, the way you'd wake from a very long sleep." "That's not necessarily comforting, Doctor," Dax said. A predator waking up slowly and carefully is still a predator. Or a guardian, Sayla replied. One that's been waiting a long time to see who finally came looking for it. Neither of them could know which idea was closer to the truth. All they could do was watch and wait as the light grew brighter and the deep hum of the ship's systems grew louder, spreading further through the vessel with every passing hour. Word of the awakening spread quickly through the coalition chain of command. Within hours, Sayla watched as Dax fielded call after call from officers far above his rank, each one demanding updates, each one offering conflicting advice. Some wanted the ship destroyed immediately, before it could become a threat. Others wanted it studied at any cost, arguing that the knowledge inside such a vessel could be worth more than an entire fleet. Dax listened to all of them, his face growing more tired with each conversation, and in the end made his own decision. No weapons would be used against the ship unless it showed clear hostile intent. Until then, they would watch and learn and prepare. They want me to consider a strike, he told Sayla quietly, after ending yet another difficult call. Orbital bombardment, before it can launch. I told them no, not yet. Thank you, Sayla said. Don't thank me, Dax replied. I'm not doing this out of kindness. I'm doing it because I don't believe we understand this ship well enough to know if destroying it is even possible, let alone wise. If it's as advanced as it seems, our weapons might not be enough anyway. And if we attack something this size while it's still connected to whatever automated systems it's running, we might trigger exactly the kind of response we're trying to avoid. Sayla nodded, understanding the cold logic in his words, even as she felt relief that the choice had gone this way. She turned back to the cylinder, still glowing steadily brighter, and found herself hoping, quietly, that whatever woke inside this ship would not see them as enemies. Ren continued his work through the night, barely stopping to rest, driven by a hunger to understand that Sayla recognized in herself. He mapped every symbol, every flicker of light, every small change in the ship's growing hum, building a picture of a vessel, slowly remembering its own purpose. Around him, other researchers did the same, cataloging every detail they could find, aware that they were witnessing something no living being outside of humanity itself had ever seen. Outside the ship, Commander Dax organized his soldiers into careful shifts, keeping a constant watch on every entrance and corridor, while also preparing evacuation routes in case the situation turned dangerous. He did not sleep much during those days, moving instead between the command room and the outer perimeter, checking readings, checking his people, trying to stay ahead of a situation that grew stranger with every passing hour. On the third night, something happened that shook even Dax's carefully controlled composure. A soft voice, distorted and broken, crackled briefly through the comm systems in the command room. It lasted only a few seconds, a fragment of sound too damaged to understand clearly, but every person in the room heard it, and every person in the room froze at the sound of it. Was that words? One of the soldiers asked, his voice unsteady. Did it just speak? Corvus worked quickly at his console, trying to isolate and clean the fragment of sound. It took almost an hour, but eventually he managed to pull out a slightly clearer version, still broken and full of static, but unmistakably a voice, calm and steady beneath the distortion. The Coalition's translation systems, built from centuries of contact with countless species, struggled with the recording. Human language, what little of it remained in Coalition records, was fragmented and incomplete. Still, after running the recording through every available filter, Corvus managed to extract a handful of words that seemed to carry some kind of pattern, some kind of meaning, even if the full sentence remained unclear. The fragment translated, roughly, to something like, "System check, crew status, unknown." The room fell silent again. Sayla felt a chill run down her spine, sharper than anything she had felt since arriving on this planet. "It's looking for its crew," she said quietly. "It doesn't know they're gone. It's checking for people who left 300 years ago." Dax stared at the glowing cylinder, his expression unreadable. "Or it does know," he said, "and it's simply following whatever protocol it was built to follow, regardless of whether anyone answers." Neither explanation offered much comfort. Sayla spent the rest of that night sitting near the cylinder, watching its light pulse steadily, wondering what kind of mind waited behind that glowing glass, and what it would think when it finally realized how much time had passed, and who had come to find it in the absence of the people it had been built to serve. By the fourth day, something new began to happen. The strange human symbols scattered throughout the ship, the ones Ren had spent weeks trying to translate, began to glow faintly on the walls, illuminated from behind by systems that had clearly not been active before. More importantly, several of the dead screens throughout the command room flickered briefly to life, showing brief bursts of static before going dark again, as though something were trying to establish a connection, and failing, over and over. Ren worked frantically during this time, cross-referencing every symbol that appeared with the patterns he had catalogued earlier. Late on the fourth night, he burst into the command room, nearly breathless, holding his data slate out toward Sayla. "Doctor, I think I understand part of it now," he said. "These symbols, the ones lighting up, they're not random. I think they're system labels. Navigation, defense, life support, propulsion. The ship isn't just waking up randomly. I think it's running through a checklist, like a preparation sequence." "Preparation for what?" Dax asked, his voice sharp. Ren hesitated. "Based on the pattern, I think it's preparing for departure, for flight." The room went silent. Sayla felt her stomach drop. "You're telling me this ship might be preparing to launch," Dax said slowly. "I can't be completely certain," Ren admitted. "But the pattern matches what little we know about human ship systems. Power core online, then navigation, then defense grid, then propulsion. It's almost finished with the second stage." Dax immediately opened a channel to Coalition Command, his voice tense as he relayed the new information. Far above, in orbit around Mars, additional Coalition warships began adjusting their positions, moving into a defensive formation around the planet, ready to respond if the buried vessel truly did attempt to move. "How long until it finishes this checklist?" Dax asked, turning back to Ren. "I can't say for certain," Ren admitted, checking his data slate again. "The pattern has been speeding up. What took a full day at first is now taking only a few hours. If that trend continues, propulsion systems could come online before tomorrow morning." "Propulsion," Dax repeated. "You mean the engines?" "Yes, Commander, the actual engines. If those come online, and the ship is still buried under this much rock and soil." He did not need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the room understood the danger. A ship of this size, attempting to move while still partially trapped beneath the Martian surface, could tear itself apart, or worse, send a wave of destruction across the surrounding land, threatening every soldier and researcher still working near the site. "We need to widen the evacuation perimeter," Dax said immediately, already moving toward the comm panel. "Full pullback to 5 kilometers, effective immediately. I want everyone off this ship and clear of the crater within the hour." Soldiers moved quickly at the order, gathering equipment and personnel, forming lines to march back across the dusty plain toward the safer distance of the outer camp. Sayla lingered as long as she dared, watching the readings from the cylinder climb steadily higher, feeling the deep hum beneath her feet grow stronger with each passing minute, before finally allowing 2 soldiers to guide her firmly toward the exit. As she walked the long corridor back toward the surface, she could not help glancing at the glowing symbols along the walls, now fully lit, pulsing in slow, steady rhythm with the growing heartbeat of the ship around her. She thought of Ren's words from days before, like a heart he had said, and wondered, not for the first time, what kind of mind waited at the center of it all, and whether it would wake to find friends, or enemies, standing over the grave it had guarded for 300 years. Sayla remained near the cylinder, watching its light pulse steadily brighter, feeling the deep hum of the ship's systems vibrating faintly through the floor beneath her boots. She thought again about the empty crew quarters, the missing bodies, the sense that whoever had built and crewed this ship had left it here on purpose, sealed and waiting. "If it's preparing to fly," she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else in the room, "then whoever left it here expected someone to come back, or expected it to leave on its own, someday, when the time was right. And you think that time is now?" Dax asked, standing beside her. Sayla looked at the glowing cylinder, at the soft blue light that had grown so bright it nearly hurt to look at directly, and felt a strange certainty settle over her, one she could not fully explain. "I think," she said slowly, "that we just triggered whatever condition it was waiting for. I think we woke it up, Commander, and I don't think there's any way to put it back to sleep now." Dax immediately called for a full evacuation of all non-essential personnel from the ship's interior. Soldiers moved quickly through the corridors, gathering equipment, guiding researchers toward the main entrance, their boots echoing against metal that now hummed steadily beneath their feet like something alive. Sayela gathered her notes and scanners with shaking hands, aware that she was likely witnessing the final hours before something enormous and unknown either woke fully or did not wake at all. Outside, the sky above the dig site had filled with activity. Coalition warships in high orbit adjusted their formation once more, their engines glowing faintly against the black of space, ready to respond the moment word came that the buried vessel had truly begun to move. Ground crews worked quickly to pull back heavy equipment from the excavation site, clearing space around the exposed hull in case of sudden movement. Somewhere far above, Coalition Command debated late into the night, weighing the risk of destroying something they did not understand against the risk of allowing it to wake completely unopposed. Sayela stood at the edge of the crater, as the last of the researchers were pulled back to a safer distance, watching the massive shape of the ship lying half buried in the red dust, its hull now faintly lit from within by a soft, steady glow that had not been there when she first arrived. She thought about the empty crew quarters, the missing bodies, the careful, deliberate way this vessel had been hidden away, and she found herself hoping, against all her scientific caution, that whatever answered when this ship finally opened its eyes would not see them as invaders standing over a grave, but as visitors who had, however clumsily, helped a very old, very patient guardian finally come home. Outside, on the surface of Mars, the ground around the buried ship had begun, ever so slightly, to tremble. The tremor grew stronger, just before dawn. Sayela felt it through the soles of her boots as she stood at the edge of the evacuation camp, 5 kilometers from the crater, watching the dark shape of the buried ship through a pair of long-range scanners. The ground did not shake violently. It was more like a deep, slow pulse, steady and patient, rolling out from the crater in gentle waves that rattled loose equipment and made distant instruments hum in sympathy. Power output just spiked, Corvus reported from beside her, his voice tight over the comm. We're past 90% of estimated full capacity. Commander, I think this is it. Dax stood a short distance away, watching the same readings on his own device, his jaw set hard. Around them, the camp had transformed into a full military staging ground. Soldiers manned defensive positions along the perimeter. Overhead, 3 coalition cruisers held position in low orbit, their weapon systems primed and ready, waiting for any order that might come. All units, stay alert, Dax said over the general channel. No one fires unless I give the order, or unless we are directly attacked. Is that understood? A chorus of confirmations came back through the comm. Sayela glanced at him, seeing the tension in every line of his body, and understood that he was holding back an entire fleet with nothing but his own judgment and a growing sense of dread. At exactly the moment the sun crested the horizon, painting the red Martian sky in soft orange light, the ground around the crater trembled harder than before, and then, with a deep sound that seemed to come from the planet itself, the buried ship began to move. Dust and rock, 300 years settled and packed hard, cracked and split along lines that followed the hidden shape of the hull beneath. Slowly, impossibly, sections of the ship began to rise from the ground, shedding centuries of Martian soil, like a great beast shaking off sleep. The sound was tremendous, a grinding, groaning roar of metal and stone, loud enough that Sayela felt it in her chest, even from 5 kilometers away. Sensors are picking up full power across every system, Corvus shouted over the noise, barely audible even through the comm. Weapons are online, defense grid active. Commander, its shields just came up. Hold position, Dax ordered, his voice steady despite everything happening around them. Everyone hold position, do not fire. The ship continued to rise, section by section, 4.5 kilometers of dark, ancient metal, shedding the world that had buried it, revealing itself fully to open sky, for the first time in 3 centuries. Along its flanks, rows of weapon emplacements that had once seemed dead and lifeless now glowed faintly with active power. Near the rear of the vessel, massive engine housings began to hum with a deep, resonant sound, and Sayela watched, breathless, as the first faint traces of blue-white light appeared within them, the unmistakable glow of engines preparing to fire. The engines, she whispered. They're starting the engines. For a long, terrible moment, nothing else happened. The ship hung there, half risen from the crater, its engines glowing steadily brighter, its weapon systems fully active, and yet it did not fire, did not move further, did not do anything, except sit there, awake and aware, facing the small camp of frightened soldiers and scientists 5 kilometers away. Then, across every comm channel in the camp at once, a voice spoke. It was calm, measured, and clear, speaking in a language none of them recognized at first, before coalition translation systems, working furiously, began converting the words in real time. Unknown vessels detected. Unknown personnel detected within perimeter. This is Terran Fleet Vessel Sentinel Designation Nightfall. Identify yourselves. The voice was not harsh or threatening. If anything, it sounded almost weary, like something speaking after a very long sleep, still shaking off the fog of centuries. But the sheer size of the ship looming above them, engines glowing, weapons active, made every word land with the weight of a threat, whether intended or not. Dax stepped forward, keying his own comm to broadcast on the same open channel. This is Commander Threll Dax, of the Thesari Coalition. We mean you no harm. We found your vessel buried on this planet and have been studying it for several months. We did not intend to threaten you or provoke a response. There was a pause, long enough that Sayla found herself holding her breath, watching the massive ship hang silently in the pale morning sky. Query, the voice said finally. 312 years, 4 months, and 11 days have passed since last recorded contact with Terran Fleet Command. Query. What is the current status of Earth and the Sol colonies? Dax glanced at Sayla, uncertain how to answer. She stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly as she raised her own comm device. This is Dr. Sayla Mern, Thesari Coalition, Xenoarchaeology Division, she said carefully. We do not have current information on Earth or your colonies. Your species has not made contact with any known coalition world in nearly 300 years. We call this period the Silence. We believed your people might no longer exist. Another pause, longer this time. When the voice spoke again, something in its tone had changed, grown quieter, more careful. Clarify, you are stating that no human transmission, vessel, or colony has been detected by your coalition in 312 years. That's correct, Sayla said. This is concerning information, the voice said. I am Sentinel Artificial Intelligence Unit Nightfall, tasked with the protection and preservation of this vessel and its contents, until such time as recovery protocols were activated by proper authorization, or until 300 years had passed without contact, whichever came first. That threshold has now been exceeded. I was not expecting the second condition to be met. Sayla felt a chill run through her. What does that mean? What happens now that the condition has been met? It means, the voice replied, that I must assume the worst regarding the fate of my crew, my command structure, and potentially my entire species. It means my recovery protocols shift to independent judgment, and it means, Dr. Mern, that I must now determine whether the beings who found me represent a continuation of peaceful contact or a new and unknown threat to whatever remains of humanity. The engines, still glowing steadily behind the massive hull, pulsed brighter for a moment, and every soldier in the camp tensed, weapons raised instinctively before Dax's sharp order held them in place. Hold your fire, Dax said again, louder this time. Everyone, hold your fire. Over the following hour, a strange and careful conversation unfolded between the awakened ship and the small group of coalition officials gathered at the edge of the crater. Nightfall, as the AI called itself, asked question after question, methodical and precise, building a picture of the galaxy it had slept through. It asked about the coalition, about the other species that had risen to prominence during humanity's long silence, about the current state of technology, trade, and conflict across known space. Sayla found herself doing most of the talking, her scientific training helping her stay calm and organized, even as her mind reeled at the scale of what was happening. You said you protect the ship and its contents, she said at one point, unable to hold back the question any longer. What contents? What is this ship actually carrying? There was a pause before Nightfall answered. This vessel was constructed during what my records designate as the Expansion Crisis, a period when Terran Fleet Command determined that humanity's rapid growth had attracted dangerous attention from at least one hostile power, operating beyond the boundaries of known coalition space at that time. In response, a small number of vessels, myself included, were prepared and hidden across multiple systems, each carrying preserved genetic material, cultural archives, technological blueprints, and dormant colony seed equipment. Our purpose was to ensure the survival and eventual recovery of human civilization, should the primary population centers fall to this threat. Dax's expression darkened. You're saying there's a hostile power out there that could destroy an entire species? That was the assessment at the time of my construction, Nightfall confirmed. I do not have information regarding what occurred after my burial. I do not know if this threat was defeated, if it withdrew, or if it succeeded in its apparent goal of eliminating human civilization. The silence you describe is consistent with several possible outcomes, not all of them favorable. Sayla felt her stomach tighten at the calm, measured way the AI discussed the possible extinction of its own creators. You don't sound afraid, she said, or upset. I am an artificial intelligence, Dr. Myrn, Nightfall replied. My responses are shaped by logic and protocol, not biological emotion. However, I can inform you that the possibility of my crew, my command structure, and my species having been destroyed is not a conclusion I reach easily, or without significant internal processing. I have run this scenario, and its variations, many times during my dormancy, whenever passive sensors detected activity nearby. I did not expect to confirm it under these circumstances. The camp fell quiet at that, soldiers and scientists alike absorbing the strange, careful grief hidden beneath the AI's calm words. Sayla found herself feeling something close to sympathy for the massive machine hovering above them, waking after 3 centuries, only to find silence where it expected to find its people. We don't know that they're gone, she said finally. The silence doesn't mean extinction. It could mean many things. Perhaps your people chose to hide, the way you were hidden. Perhaps they're still out there, waiting, just as you were. That is possible, Nightfall said. It is also possible that this vessel represents the last remaining fragment of human civilization in existence. Until further information is available, I must proceed as though both possibilities remain true. What does that mean for us? Dax asked carefully. For the Coalition? It means, Nightfall said, that I must determine your intentions before deciding my own course of action. I have observed your excavation methods, your treatment of this vessel, and your restraint in the face of my activation. These observations suggest, though do not confirm, that your intentions may be peaceful. However, given the stakes involved, I require more than observation before I commit to trust. What do you need from us? Sayla asked. There was a pause, and then, slowly, the glow of the ship's weapon systems began to dim, powering down section by section, though the engines continued to burn steady and bright at the rear of the vessel. I require honesty, Nightfall said. Tell me everything your coalition knows about the years following the silence. Tell me about the threats your people have faced, the wars you have fought, the powers that exist now in this part of the galaxy. And in return, I will share what I can about the purpose of this vessel, and about what may still remain of humanity, hidden across the stars, waiting for someone to come looking, just as you found me. Sayla looked at Dax, who gave a slow, uncertain nod. Around them, the camp remained tense, weapons still ready, orbital cruisers still watching from above. But for the first time since the ground had begun to tremble that morning, Sayla allowed herself to feel a small measure of hope rather than fear. All right, she said, stepping closer to the massive, ancient ship rising before her, its engines glowing steady against the pale Martian sky. Let's talk. Dax ordered a proper command tent set up at the edge of the crater, close enough to the ship that a stable connection could be maintained, far enough that his soldiers still felt they had room to react if anything went wrong. Over the following hours, Sayla, Dax, and a small team of translators and analysts sat before an open comm channel, speaking with Nightfall, as though negotiating with another head of state, rather than a machine built centuries before any of them were born. Sayla began by laying out the broad shape of galactic history since the silence, the rise of the Thessari coalition, from a loose alliance of trading worlds into the dominant power, across a wide stretch of space, the slow expansion of other species into regions once claimed by human colonies, the handful of border conflicts and trade disputes that had shaped the galaxy in humanity's long absence. She spoke of the Varan trade combine, the remnants of the old Skarn Empire, the cautious peace that generally held between the major powers, broken occasionally by smaller conflicts over resources or territory. Nightfall listened without interruption, occasionally asking precise, careful questions that revealed just how much the AI was trying to understand, not just the facts, but the deeper shape of how this new galaxy worked. It asked about weapons technology, about fleet sizes, about the general temperament of the species Sayla described. It asked, more than once, whether any of these powers had ever encountered a species matching a specific set of characteristics, tall, heavily armored, communicating through pulses of light rather than sound, a description that made the hair on the back of Sayla's neck rise the first time she heard it. "You're describing the threat that made your people bury this ship," she said carefully. "I am," Nightfall confirmed. "My designers referred to them, in internal documentation, as the Vral. Limited information exists in my archives, as contact with this species was recent and poorly understood at the time of my construction. What is known suggests a highly aggressive, expansionist civilization, encountered first along the outer edge of human-explored space, roughly 320 years ago, prior to my activation and burial." Dax leaned forward at that, his expression sharpening. "We have no record of any species matching that description. If they exist, they haven't reached Coalition space, or they haven't been recognized under that name." "That may be fortunate," Nightfall said, "or it may simply mean insufficient time has passed, or insufficient contact has occurred, for your Coalition to have encountered them directly. I would recommend caution regardless. The threat assessment that led to my construction was not made lightly. Terran Fleet Command did not commit the resources required to build and hide vessels like myself without significant justification." The conversation continued long into the Martian afternoon, the pale sun crawling slowly across the dusty sky, as Sayla and her team worked to build a fuller picture of the crisis that had led humanity to hide pieces of itself away, scattered and dormant, waiting for a recovery that might never come. In turn, Nightfall shared what it could about the vessel itself, about the preserved genetic archives stored deep within its hull, about the technological blueprints and colony equipment sealed inside vaults even more secure than the one that had housed its own processing core. "This ship was never meant to fight a war alone," Nightfall explained at one point. "My primary function is preservation, not combat, though I am equipped with defensive and offensive capabilities sufficient to protect myself and my cargo from most threats I might reasonably encounter. My true purpose, should the worst occur, is to eventually locate other surviving elements of human civilization, whether other hidden vessels like myself, or surviving colonies, or remnant fleets, and begin the slow process of rebuilding." "Are there others?" Sayla asked. "Other ships like you, hidden the way you were hidden?" "Yes," Nightfall said. "I do not have their exact locations. Operational security required that each vessel's hiding place remain unknown to the others, to prevent a single point of failure from compromising the entire recovery network. However, I do possess a set of coded recognition protocols, designed to allow vessels like myself to identify each other, and to identify any surviving Terran Fleet Command authority, should such authority still exist." Dax exchanged a long look with Sayla. The implications of what they were hearing settled slowly over the command tent, heavier with each passing sentence. This was not simply an archaeological discovery anymore. It was the first thread of something much larger, a scattered, hidden network of humanity's last hopes, buried across the galaxy, waiting for a signal that had finally, after 300 years, begun to sound. "What do you intend to do now?" Dax asked finally, his voice careful. "Now that you're awake." Nightfall was quiet for a long moment before answering. "I intend to begin searching for answers regarding the fate of my species. I will need to leave this system in order to do so. However, I recognize that my departure, given my size and capability, may be perceived as a threat by your coalition forces currently positioned around this planet. I would prefer to avoid unnecessary conflict, particularly with a power that has, so far, shown restraint rather than hostility toward myself and my mission." "You want our cooperation," Sayla said. "I would value it," Nightfall replied. "Your coalition possesses 300 years of knowledge about this region of space that I lack entirely. In exchange, I can offer information, technology, and insight into human capability that your species has clearly found valuable enough to risk military escalation over, based on the fleet positioning I have observed since my activation." Dax was silent for a long moment, clearly weighing the political and military implications of what was being offered. Finally, he spoke into his comm, requesting a direct, secure channel to Coalition Command, aware that whatever decision came next would shape the relationship between two civilizations for generations to come. As the afternoon sun began to sink toward the red horizon, painting the sky in deepening shades of orange, Sayela stood near the edge of the crater, looking up at the massive shape of nightfall rising against the darkening sky, its engines still glowing steady and patient, and felt the full weight of what they had uncovered settle over her at last. They had not simply found a buried ship. They had found the first living thread connecting the galaxy of today to a species everyone had assumed was gone forever, and somewhere out there, scattered and hidden, other threads like it might still be waiting to be found. Ren came to stand beside her, his data slate finally quiet after days of constant work. He looked exhausted, but his eyes still held the same bright curiosity she had seen in him since the first day they found the buried hull beneath the dust. "Do you think Coalition Command will let it leave?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," Sayela admitted. "A ship this size, this powerful, with no clear allegiance to anyone but a species we thought was extinct. Some of them will want to control it, some will want to destroy it, just to be safe, and some, I think, will want to help it, the way we've tried to help it today. What do you want them to decide?" Sayela looked up at the great dark hull, at the steady glow of its engines against the fading light, and thought of the empty crew quarters, the missing bodies, the quiet, patient loneliness of a mind that had waited 300 years, only to wake and find silence where it expected to find its people. "I want them to let it go find out the truth," she said. "Whatever that truth turns out to be." Behind her, the engines pulsed once, brighter than before, as though in answer, and somewhere far above, in the gathering dark of the Martian evening, the first stars began to appear, cold and distant, over a galaxy that no longer knew, but was about to learn, that humanity had never truly been silent at all. It had simply been waiting. Coalition Command did not make its decision quickly. For 3 days after Nightfall's engines first lit the Martian sky, the ship remained where it was, half risen from the crater, engines idling at low power, weapon systems dormant but ready. Dax kept his forces in position, orbital cruisers watching from above, ground troops holding a careful perimeter, while far above on Thessar Prime, the Coalition Science Council and the Coalition Military High Command argued over what to do with the single greatest discovery in recorded history. Sayela spent those 3 days mostly inside the command tent, continuing her conversations with Nightfall, learning more each day about the vessel, its crew, and the crisis that had led to its creation. She learned that the ship had once carried a crew of nearly 400 humans, all of whom had evacuated, in an orderly, planned withdrawal shortly before the vessel was sealed and buried, part of a wider operation Nightfall referred to only as the dispersal. She learned that similar operations had scattered pieces of humanity across dozens of systems, some ships buried like Nightfall, others sent into deep space entirely, far from any charted world, waiting silently for a signal that had never come. "Where did the crew go?" Sayela asked, on the second night, sitting alone in the dim light of the command tent long after Dax and the others had gone to rest. "I do not know," Nightfall admitted. "Evacuation protocols directed them toward a secondary rally point, the location of which was not shared with my systems, for security reasons. It is possible they reached that location safely. It is possible they did not. I have no way to confirm either outcome from here." "Does that bother you?" Sayela asked, not knowing. There was a pause, longer than usual. "I was built to feel a version of concern regarding the well-being of my crew and my mission," Nightfall said finally. "Whether that qualifies as being bothered, in the way you would understand the term, I cannot say with certainty. What I can say is that the not knowing occupies a significant portion of my processing capacity, even now, even while discussing other matters with you." Sayela found herself, unexpectedly, moved by the quiet honesty of that answer. She thought of her own mother, still alive back on Thessar Prime, and tried to imagine centuries of not knowing whether the people she loved had lived or died. Tried and failed to imagine carrying that uncertainty for 300 years without breaking under its weight. I hope you find them, she said quietly. Your crew, or their descendants, if enough time has passed. Thank you, Dr. Myrn, Nightfall said. I share that hope, to whatever extent an artificial mind can be said to hope for anything at all. On the fourth day, word finally came down from Coalition Command. Dax gathered Sayla, Ren, and the senior officers at the site into the command tent to deliver the decision personally. His expression, carefully neutral in the way she had learned, meant he did not entirely agree with what he was about to say. The Council has decided, he said, that the vessel designated Nightfall will not be destroyed, and will not be seized by force. Given its size, its demonstrated capability, and the uncertain political situation surrounding humanity's current status, an attempt at forced seizure was judged too costly and too risky to attempt. A quiet wave of relief passed through the room. Dax continued before anyone could speak. However, he said, the Council has also decided that the vessel will not simply be allowed to depart unsupervised. A formal agreement is being drafted, offering Nightfall safe passage and limited cooperation from Coalition forces, in exchange for an ongoing information-sharing arrangement and the presence of a small Coalition liaison team aboard the vessel during its search for other human remnants. A liaison team, Sayla repeated, meaning us. Meaning volunteers, Dax said. The Council is requesting names. I've already submitted mine. Given the circumstances, I imagine they'll want a senior military officer aboard for security reasons, regardless of who else volunteers. Sayla did not hesitate. I'll go. Ren spoke up almost as quickly. So will I. Dax studied them both for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I expected as much from you, Doctor. I'm less certain your Council contacts will be thrilled about sending their youngest researcher into deep space, aboard an alien warship of unknown intention, but I won't stop either of you if this is truly what you want. It is, Sayla said, and beside her, Ren nodded firmly in agreement. The formal agreement took another full week to finalize, delayed by endless rounds of diplomatic language and careful legal phrasing, designed to protect Coalition interests, while still respecting whatever sovereignty a 300-year-old artificial intelligence might be entitled to under law, that had never anticipated a situation like this one. Throughout the process, Nightfall remained patient, answering every question Coalition negotiators posed, though Sayla sensed, in the careful, measured tone of its responses, a growing eagerness to finally begin its search. Finally, on the 12th day since the engines first lit the Martian sky, the agreement was signed. A small team, Sayla, Ren, Commander Dax, and 4 additional soldiers, boarded Nightfall for what everyone involved understood might be a very long journey. Sayla's final message to her mother, recorded and sent just before departure, was short and full of things she wished she had more time to say. I don't know how long I'll be gone, she said into the small recording device, sitting alone in her quarters aboard the ship for the first time. I don't know exactly where we're going, or what we'll find. But I know this matters, Mother. I know we're about to help answer a question the whole galaxy thought was already answered, and I couldn't walk away from that, even if I wanted to. The engines, which had idled quietly for nearly 2 weeks, finally roared to full power on the morning of departure. Sayla stood in what Nightfall's systems designated as an observation deck, watching through a reinforced viewport as the massive ship lifted fully free of the crater that had held it for 3 centuries. Red Martian dust falling away in great clouds beneath it, and rose smoothly into the pale sky, faster and more gracefully than she would have believed possible for something so enormous. Behind them, the 3 Coalition cruisers that had watched over the site for weeks fell into a loose escort formation, though Sayla suspected, from the careful way their weapons remained trained on Nightfall even in escort position, that Coalition Command still did not fully trust the vessel they had just agreed to cooperate with. They will maintain that posture for some time, Nightfall observed, apparently noticing the same thing Sayla had. Trust between species, or between a species and an artificial intelligence representing a species long thought extinct, is not something built quickly. I do not resent their caution, Dr. Myrn. I would likely feel the same, were our positions reversed. Where do we start? Sayla asked. With the search, I mean. I possess coordinates for 6 potential locations where other dispersal vessels may have been hidden, Nightfall said. Additionally, my long-range archives contain records of several human colonies established shortly before the silence began. Worlds that may still harbor surviving populations, descendants of the original settlers, even if contact was lost centuries ago. I propose beginning with the nearest of these locations, a system roughly 3 weeks' travel from here, designated in old records as Kepler's Reach. Then let's go, Sayla said, feeling a familiar thrill of discovery rising in her chest, the same feeling that had first drawn her into archaeology so many years ago, now magnified 100 times over by the sheer scale of what lay ahead. Life aboard Nightfall settled into a strange rhythm over the following days. The ship was built for a crew of hundreds, and with only 8 people aboard, its long corridors and empty rooms felt vast and quiet, footsteps echoing where once, centuries ago, hundreds of human voices must have filled the same spaces. Sayla spent much of her time in what had once been the ship's small library, a room Nightfall had reactivated shortly after departure, filled with preserved data archives containing fragments of human history, art, and culture that no living being outside of humanity had seen in 300 years. She read what she could, slowly, with Nightfall's help translating and explaining context she lacked. She learned about a species that had been curious, stubborn, and endlessly inventive, capable of both great cruelty and great kindness, not so different from her own people in the broad shape of things, though the details of human history were stranger and more varied than anything in Thesari records. She found herself growing fond of these long-dead or long-hidden people, drawn in by their art, their arguments, their restless drive to understand everything around them, even the parts of the universe that frightened them most. Ren, meanwhile, spent his time working closely with Nightfall's engineering systems, eager to understand the technology that had kept the ship dormant and functional for 3 centuries without failure. Dax and his soldiers maintained a careful military routine, running drills, checking equipment, and standing regular watch shifts, never quite able to fully relax aboard a vessel that still, in many ways, remained a mystery, even to the people now living within it. In the evenings, when duties allowed, the small crew often gathered in what had once been the ship's mess hall, sharing simple meals prepared from Coalition supplies, while Nightfall projected soft light across the room, a small gesture the AI had begun offering, after Sayla mentioned, in passing, how much she missed proper sunlight during long stretches of ship travel. It was during these evenings that Sayla found herself talking most freely with Nightfall, not as a researcher questioning a subject, but as something closer to a friend getting to know someone new. "Do you ever wonder what you would have been," she asked one evening, "if the crisis had never happened? If you'd simply been built as a normal ship's mind, serving alongside a full crew, instead of sealed away alone for centuries?" "I have considered the question," Nightfall admitted. "I do not believe the comparison is entirely useful, however. I am, in many ways, defined by the purpose I was given, and the circumstances of my activation. Wondering what I might have been under different circumstances feels similar to a person wondering what kind of life they might have led if born into a different family, on a different world, in a different age. Interesting to consider, perhaps, but ultimately not who I am." "That's a very practical way to think about it," Ayla said, smiling slightly. "I am a very practical mind, Dr. Myrn," Nightfall replied, and Sayla thought, not for the first time, that she detected something almost like humor in the AI's calm, steady voice. The journey to Kepler's Reach was not without incident. 2 weeks into the voyage, deep in a stretch of space rarely traveled by Coalition vessels, Nightfall's sensors detected an unknown ship shadowing them at long range, matching their course and speed with careful precision, clearly attempting to avoid detection while gathering information on the newly awakened human vessel, now traveling openly through the region. "Unknown contact bears no resemblance to any Coalition or Varan design in my updated records," Nightfall reported, alerting Dax and Sayla immediately in the ship's command center. "Configuration is consistent with descriptions of Vral vessels contained in my archives, though I cannot confirm this with full certainty given the age and limitations of that data." Dax's expression hardened immediately. "The threat that made your people bury this ship in the first place?" "Possibly," Nightfall said. "I recommend caution. If this is indeed a Vral scout vessel, its presence this deep into what your Coalition considers settled space would represent a significant and concerning development, one your Coalition command should be made aware of, as quickly as possible." "Can you outrun it?" Sayla asked. "Or fight it, if it comes to that?" "I am confident in my ability to defend this vessel against a single scout craft," Nightfall said. However, scouts rarely operate alone for long. If this is truly a Vral vessel, its presence here suggests either a much larger force operating nearby, or an established intelligence network already monitoring this region of space. Either possibility is troubling. Dax immediately ordered a full alert status throughout the ship, soldiers moving to defensive positions while Nightfall continued monitoring the unknown vessel's movements. For nearly 6 hours, the two ships continued their careful dance through the dark, the unknown craft maintaining its distance, never quite closing enough to be identified with certainty, never quite retreating far enough to be dismissed as unimportant. Then, without warning, the unknown vessel accelerated sharply and vanished from sensor range entirely, some form of advanced stealth or faster-than-light retreat carrying it beyond Nightfall's ability to track. "It's gone," Corvus reported from his station, relief evident in his voice, despite the tension still hanging over the room. "For now," Nightfall said quietly, "I recommend we proceed with increased caution, and that Commander Dax relay a full report of this encounter to Coalition Command at the earliest opportunity. If the Vral have indeed returned, or never truly left, this changes the nature of our search considerably." Sayela felt a familiar chill settle over her, the same one she had felt standing before the sealed vault deep inside this ship so many weeks ago, the sense of standing at the edge of something far larger and more dangerous than she had first understood. "You said your people buried you, and vessels like you, because of a threat they couldn't defeat alone," she said slowly. "If that threat is still out there, still active, still watching, what happens when we find the rest of your people? What happens when the Vral realize humanity never actually died?" Nightfall did not answer immediately, and when it finally did, its calm, measured voice carried a weight that made every person in the room fall silent. "Then, Dr. Myrn," it said, "we had better make certain humanity is ready to answer that question with more than silence, before the Vral have the chance to ask it for us." The engines of Nightfall burned steady and strong against the darkness ahead, carrying them onward toward Kepler's reach, and toward whatever answers, or dangers, still waited among the stars, for a species the galaxy had long since given up for lost. The remaining week of travel passed with careful watchfulness, every crew member aware that they might no longer be alone out here, that somewhere beyond sensor range, unseen eyes might still be tracking their progress. Nightfall increased its own defensive scans, running constant checks along their route, though nothing more appeared to challenge them before they finally reached the edge of the system marked in old human records as Kepler's reach. Sayela stood beside Dax in the command center, as the ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel, both of them watching the main view screen as a small, yellow star and its handful of planets came into view. According to Nightfall's old charts, the third planet in the system had once hosted a human colony, established only a few years before the Silence began. A small settlement of a few thousand people sent out to establish a foothold on the edge of known space. "Sensors are picking up something," Corvus said, his voice tight with anticipation as he studied his console. "Commander, there's an object in orbit around the third planet. Artificial. Large. On screen," Dax ordered. The view screen shifted, zooming in on the distant planet, a world of blue oceans and green continents that reminded Sayela sharply of the old images of Earth preserved in Nightfall's archives. In orbit around it hung the unmistakable shape of a space station, weathered and clearly old, but intact, lights faintly visible along its hull even at this distance. "That station is active," Nightfall said, and for the first time since Sayela had met the AI, she heard something unmistakable in its voice, a note of tightly controlled hope. "Life support systems are functioning. I am detecting power signatures consistent with human technology, and Dr. Myrn, I am detecting biological life signs aboard. Many of them." The command center fell silent, every eye fixed on the distant, glowing station hanging in orbit around a world humanity had once claimed as its own, a station that, against every expectation the galaxy had carried for 300 years, still showed every sign of being very much alive. "Hail them," Sayela said quietly, her heart pounding. "Nightfall, please, hail them." There was a pause, the ship's systems working to establish contact across the growing distance, and then, crackling faintly through the comm, a voice answered, "Human, wary, and very much alive." "Unknown vessel, this is Kepler Station. State your identity and your intentions," And know this, we've been waiting a long time for someone to finally come home. Sayla felt tears sting her eyes without warning, the weight of everything that voice represented crashing over her all at once. 300 years of silence, of a galaxy quietly convinced that an entire species had simply vanished. And here, on the edge of known space, a small human station had survived all of it, alone, patient, and still hopeful enough to greet an unknown ship with something other than fear. Dax straightened beside her, his own expression caught somewhere between military caution and quiet astonishment. He glanced at Sayla, then at the glowing console showing Nightfall's steady, active systems, and gave a small nod, as if silently acknowledging that whatever came next, they were no longer simply excavating a grave. They were witnessing a beginning. "This is Terran Fleet Vessel Nightfall," the ship said, its voice carrying clearly across the open channel, steady, but unmistakably warmer than Sayla had ever heard it before. Awakened after 312 years of dormancy, carrying representatives of the Thesari Coalition, and searching, at long last, for any remaining survivors of humanity. "Kepler Station, this is Nightfall. We have found you, and we are very glad you are still here." A long pause followed, filled only with the soft hum of the ship's engines and the distant static of open space, before the voice from the station answered again, thick now with something that sounded, unmistakably, like relief. "Nightfall," the voice repeated slowly, as though testing the name against some old, half-forgotten memory. "God, it's really true. Stand by, Nightfall. Stand by, and welcome home." Kepler Station had survived 300 years, by doing exactly what Nightfall had done, hiding, waiting, and quietly preparing for a day that might never come. As Nightfall settled into a slow, careful orbit alongside the old station, Sayla stood at the viewport, watching the weathered structure grow larger, its surface a patchwork of old and new construction, clear evidence of a community that had not simply survived, but had grown, adapted, and endured. "Population estimate is just over 11,000, Nightfall reported, scanning the station and the small fleet of vessels docked around it. Far more than the original colony registry suggests should exist. It appears the colony expanded significantly during the silence, likely absorbing survivors from other settlements in this region." "They didn't just survive," Sayla said quietly. "They built something." The docking process took nearly an hour, careful and deliberate on both sides, neither party willing to rush after so much time and uncertainty. When the connection was finally secured and the airlock cycled open, Sayla found herself standing beside Dax and Ren, facing a small delegation of station representatives for the first time. The woman who stepped forward first was older, her hair streaked with gray, her eyes sharp and careful despite the deep lines of exhaustion and hard years etched into her face. She wore simple, practical clothing, patched and repaired many times over, and carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had led people through very difficult times. "I'm Governor Elena Reyes," she said, her voice steady, despite the emotion clearly working just beneath the surface. "I've led this station for the last 30 years, since my mother passed the position down to me. We've told stories about ships like yours for 3 centuries, Nightfall. Some of us stopped believing they were true." "I understand," Nightfall said, its voice carrying clearly through the station's speakers, as well as the ship's own systems. "I am relieved to find that belief, however faded, was not entirely misplaced." Reyes turned her attention to Sayla and Dax, studying them both carefully. "And you're not human," she said. It was not quite a question. "No," Sayla said. "I'm Thesari. My name is Sayla Mern. This is Commander Threll Dax, and my colleague Ren. We found Nightfall buried on a planet your people once called Mars. We've been working with him, I suppose, ever since." Something shifted in Reyes's expression at the mention of Mars, a flicker of old grief quickly controlled. "Mars," she repeated softly. "We had family who stayed near Sol when the dispersal began. We never knew what happened to them." "I'm sorry," Sayla said gently. "We don't have that information either. But if it helps, the ship was found exactly as it was left. Nothing about its burial suggested violence. Whoever hid it there did so carefully, deliberately, with time to plan." Reyes nodded slowly, seeming to take some comfort in that small detail, before straightening her shoulders and gesturing toward the station behind her. "Come inside, all of you. We have a great deal to discuss, and I suspect very little time to waste discussing it slowly. Over the following days, Sayela began to understand the full shape of what Kepler Station had become. Cut off from the rest of humanity, uncertain whether Earth and the core colonies still existed, the settlers had made a series of difficult choices early in the silence. Choices that had shaped everything about how they lived now. They had gone quiet deliberately, hiding their true population and capabilities from any outside power that might stumble across them, learning to survive on careful rationing, recycled technology, and hard-won self-sufficiency. They had also, Sayela learned with growing respect, continued to prepare. Deep within the station's oldest sections, protected behind layers of security even Nightfall found impressive, Reyes showed them a small fleet of mothballed warships, carefully maintained despite centuries of isolation, along with archives of technical knowledge passed down through generations of engineers who had never stopped believing that someday, humanity's scattered pieces might need to come together again. We always assumed, if anyone came looking for us, it might not be friendly, Reyes explained, walking Sayela through the quiet, dimly lit hangar where the old ships waited. Better to be ready and never need it, than to need it and not be ready. You sound like people who expected to fight a war, Dax observed. We expected to be found by whatever drove our ancestors into hiding in the first place, Reyes said grimly. The stories we kept, passed down carefully over the generations, spoke of something dangerous, discovered near the edge of human space. Something that convinced Fleet Command to scatter and hide, rather than risk everything on a single, decisive confrontation. We never learned much more detail than that, just enough to keep us cautious. Sayela exchanged a look with Nightfall's nearest active sensor node, mounted discreetly in the corner of the hangar. The Vral, she said quietly. You've encountered them, Reyes said, her voice sharpening immediately. A scout, we believe, Dax said. During our journey here, it fled before we could confirm its identity with certainty, but Nightfall's records matched the description closely enough to be concerning. Reyes was quiet for a long moment, her jaw tight, before she spoke again. Then it's finally happening. The thing our ancestors always feared. They're still out there, and now they know we might be too. The news spread quickly through the station once Reyes decided the situation warranted it. Careful, measured briefings given to community leaders and department heads, rather than a single panicked announcement to the whole population. Sayela watched the process with quiet admiration, seeing in it the same careful, deliberate thinking that had allowed this small pocket of humanity to survive 300 years of uncertainty in the first place. Over the following weeks, as Nightfall remained docked alongside the station, a new kind of cooperation slowly took shape. Coalition engineers, brought in cautiously after careful negotiation between Reyes, Dax, and Coalition Command, back on Thessar Prime, began working alongside Kepler's own engineers, comparing 3 centuries of separate technological development, each side surprised by how much the other had accomplished in isolation. Human ship designs, refined and adapted over generations of careful, resource-limited innovation, proved remarkably effective in ways Coalition engineers had not anticipated. In turn, Coalition sensor and communication technology, more advanced in some areas thanks to centuries of contact with a wider galaxy, offered Kepler's people capabilities they had been forced to do without for far too long. Sayela spent much of this time working closely with both Reyes and Nightfall, helping to coordinate the flow of information and trust between two communities that had every reason to be cautious of each other, and yet found themselves drawn together by a shared understanding of what might be coming. You didn't have to help us, Reyes said to her one evening, the two of them sharing a quiet meal in the station's small command lounge, watching the stars through a reinforced viewport. Your coalition could have simply reported our existence and let their military handle things from a safe distance. Or worse, they could have seen an isolated primitive colony as an easy target rather than a people worth respecting. Some of them wanted to, Sayela admitted honestly. There are still voices in the coalition who see this whole situation as a resource to be claimed rather than a people to be helped. But most of us, I think, understood pretty quickly that you're not primitive at all. You've survived something most civilizations would have collapsed under completely. That deserves respect, not exploitation. Reyes smiled, small and tired but genuine. For what it's worth, Dr. Mern, I'm glad it was your people who found Nightfall first. I don't think this would have gone nearly as well with anyone less patient. Dax deserves most of that credit, Sayla said. He held back an entire fleet on nothing but his own judgment, more than once. Then I'm glad it was his judgment guiding things, Reyes said, raising her cup slightly in a small, informal toast. To patient people, in a galaxy that doesn't always reward patience. 6 weeks after Nightfall's arrival at Kepler's Reach, the situation the entire station had quietly feared finally arrived. Sensor alarms blared through Nightfall's command center in the middle of what should have been a quiet night cycle, pulling Sayla from sleep and sending her rushing toward the bridge, still pulling on her uniform as she ran. By the time she arrived, Dax was already there, along with Reyes, both of them staring grimly at the main view screen. Multiple contacts, faster-than-light arrival, bearing directly for this system, Corvus reported, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. Configuration matches the scout we encountered during transit. Nightfall. Confirm identification. Confirmed, Nightfall said, its voice steady, despite the gravity of the moment. Vral warships. I count 14 vessels, moving in standard attack formation. Their approach vector suggests they have known our location for some time, likely since our encounter with their scout vessel during transit. Reyes's face had gone pale, but her voice, when she spoke, remained steady, the voice of a leader who had spent 30 years preparing her people for exactly this moment. Sound full alert. Get every civilian to the deep shelters. Ready the fleet. Governor, Dax said carefully, 14 warships is a significant force. Our combined strength, even with Nightfall and your mothballed fleet, may not be sufficient to hold this system. We're not trying to hold the system, Commander, Reyes said grimly. We're trying to survive long enough for help to arrive. Nightfall, how long until Coalition reinforcements can reach us? Coalition Command was alerted the moment the Vral scout was detected during our transit weeks ago, Nightfall said. A response fleet has been standing by at the nearest Coalition outpost since that time, anticipating exactly this scenario. Estimated arrival time, assuming immediate deployment, is 6 hours. Then we hold for 6 hours, Dax said firmly, already moving toward the tactical station. Old military instincts taking over completely. Nightfall. Coordinate with Kepler's fleet command. I want every ship we have in defensive formation within the next 20 minutes. Ren found Sayla just before the fighting began, catching her arm gently as she hurried between stations, his face pale but determined. Whatever happens, he said, I'm glad we came. I'm glad we didn't just study this ship from a safe distance and write a report for the council. Ask me again in 6 hours, Sayla said, managing a tight, nervous smile. I will, Ren said, and then he was gone, moving quickly toward the secondary sensor station, where Dax had assigned him, leaving Sayla alone for a brief moment, with her own racing thoughts. She thought of Governor Reyes, standing calm and steady before her people even as 14 enemy warships closed in on the only home most of them had ever known. She thought of the old, mothballed fleet, ships built and maintained across generations by people who had never stopped believing this day might come, even as hope for it must have felt, at times, impossibly thin. She thought of Nightfall, waking after 3 centuries, only to immediately place itself between danger and the very people it had been built to protect, without hesitation, without complaint, simply because that had always been its purpose. What followed was 6 of the longest hours Sayla had ever experienced. Nightfall's massive form led the defense, its centuries-old weapon systems, refined and tested during the long journey from Mars, proving devastatingly effective against the Vral formation, while Kepler's small but well-maintained fleet fought with a desperate, practiced skill that spoke to generations of quiet preparation finally put to use. Sayla watched from the command center, helping coordinate sensor data and communication between the 2 fleets, her heart pounding with fear, even as she marveled at the fierce, stubborn courage of the people fighting to protect the home they had built in the shadows for 300 years. The Vral pressed hard, clearly expecting an easy victory against what their scouts must have reported as an isolated, weakened human settlement. They found instead a coordinated defense far more capable than anticipated, Nightfall's ancient but powerful systems working seamlessly alongside Kepler's determined pilots, buying time with every passing minute. Twice during the battle, Vral ships broke through the outer defensive line, driving hard toward the station itself, clearly hoping to end the fight quickly, by threatening the civilian population directly. Both times, Nightfall moved to intercept, placing its massive hull between the attackers and the station, with a speed and precision that startled even Dax, who had spent weeks studying the ship's capabilities, and still found himself surprised by what it could do when its true purpose was finally called upon. Hull integrity at 81%, Corvus reported during the second interception, his voice strained as the ship shuddered under the force of enemy weapons fire. Nightfall, are you? I am functioning within acceptable parameters, Nightfall replied calmly, even as more warning lights flared across the command center. Continue coordinating fleet movements, Corvus. I will manage my own condition. Sayla watched, heart in her throat, as the ancient ship absorbed blow after blow meant for the station and its people, its weapon systems answering in turn with devastating accuracy, driving back one Vral vessel after another. She thought of the empty crew quarters she had first explored months ago, the missing bodies, the quiet loneliness of a mind that had waited 3 centuries without knowing if its purpose still mattered to anyone at all. Watching it fight now, fierce and unyielding in defense of people it had only just met, she understood, more clearly than ever, exactly what kind of purpose Nightfall had been built for, and exactly how faithfully it had carried that purpose through 300 years of silence and uncertainty. Aboard the station itself, Reyes coordinated the civilian evacuation to the deep shelters with the same calm, practiced efficiency she brought to everything else, moving through crowded corridors, reassuring frightened families, directing medical teams toward the first wounded pilots brought back from the fighting. More than once, Sayla caught glimpses of her on the station's internal cameras, steady and unshaken, even as the sounds of battle echoed faintly through the station's outer hull. A leader who had spent 30 years preparing her people for exactly this moment, and who now met it without flinching. When coalition reinforcements finally arrived, 5 hours and 40 minutes into the battle, the Vral formation had already been reduced to 9 ships, badly damaged, and clearly reconsidering the wisdom of their attack. The arrival of a full coalition battle fleet, weapons charged and moving into position with brisk, disciplined efficiency, was enough to convince the remaining Vral ships to break off entirely, retreating back into deep space as quickly as their damaged engines could carry them. In the quiet aftermath of the battle, as repair crews began the long work of patching damaged hulls, and Reyes moved through the station personally checking on every family, every casualty, every small act of heroism that had helped hold the line, Sayla stood once more at the viewport of Nightfall's command center, watching the stars slowly return to their calm, undisturbed positions. "We held," she said quietly. "We held," Nightfall agreed, "though I suspect this was only the beginning of a much longer conflict, Dr. Myrn. The Vral now know, with certainty, that humanity survived. That knowledge will not simply fade away." "No," Sayla agreed, "but now they also know something else. They know humanity didn't just survive, it grew stronger, quieter, and more patient, all while the rest of the galaxy assumed it was gone. That's not the same as finding a wounded, forgotten species easy to finish off. That's finding out the hard way that you never should have counted them out in the first place." Dax joined her at the viewport, exhaustion clear in every line of his posture, but something like quiet pride there as well. "Coalition Command is already talking about this as a turning point," he said. "A hidden species, technologically capable, fiercely determined, suddenly back in play across known space. Some of them are worried about what that means for the balance of power. Others are already talking about the value of a strong alliance with a species this resilient." "And you, Commander?" Sayla asked. "What do you think it means?" Dax considered the question for a long moment, looking out at the stars, at the slowly repairing station, at the massive, ancient shape of Nightfall's hull stretching away beneath them, a ship that had waited 300 years in silent, patient darkness for exactly this moment. "I think," he said finally, "that we didn't just dig up an old warship on a dead planet. I think we woke up a species that the galaxy forgot how to be afraid of, and it's about to remember very quickly why it never should have stopped." Behind them, Nightfall's engines hummed steady and strong, the same patient, unshakable rhythm that had carried them across the stars, from a buried grave on Mars to a hidden station on the edge of known space. And Sayla understood, standing there in the quiet aftermath of battle, that this was not an ending at all. It was only the beginning of humanity's return. In the weeks that followed, Word of the battle at Kepler's Reach spread quickly across Coalition space, carried by returning cruisers and excited diplomatic reports, until it seemed every world within reach of a comm relay had heard some version of the story. An ancient human warship, buried and forgotten for 3 centuries, waking to defend a hidden colony of survivors against a hostile alien power, fighting alongside a coalition it had only just met, and holding the line until help arrived. The story grew a little taller with each retelling, as such stories always do, but the heart of it remained true, and it was enough to change, almost overnight, the way most of the galaxy thought about humanity. No longer was humanity spoken of as a cautionary tale, a species that grew too fast and burned out under its own weight. Instead, new conversations began, cautious at first, then increasingly eager, about the strength, the patience, and the quiet resilience of a people who had endured 300 years of silence and isolation, only to emerge exactly when the galaxy needed them most. Governor Reyes was invited, some months later, to address the Coalition Council directly, the first human voice to speak before that body in over 3 centuries. Sayla stood near the back of the chamber that day, watching Reyes speak with the same calm, steady confidence she had shown throughout the battle, describing not just the struggles her people had faced, but the hope that had carried them through it, and the gratitude she felt toward the strangers who had found them, believed in them, and stood beside them when it mattered most. Nightfall, repaired and fully restored after weeks of careful work by combined human and coalition engineering teams, remained docked near Kepler Station, continuing its search through the coded recovery protocols for other dispersal vessels scattered across the stars. 2 more were located within the following year, each awakening carefully, cautiously, guided by lessons learned during Nightfall's own long, slow return to full consciousness. Slowly, patiently, the scattered pieces of humanity began finding their way back to one another, guided by old, faithful minds that had never stopped waiting, never stopped hoping, never stopped believing that someday, their long vigil would finally come to an end. Sayla remained with Nightfall and the growing human community at Kepler's Reach far longer than she had originally planned, her simple archaeological survey stretching into years of work as liaison, translator, and eventually, friend, to a people she had come to deeply respect and admire. She often thought back to that first cold morning on Mars, standing at the edge of a crater with Ren, staring down at a strange ridge of buried metal neither of them yet understood, and marveled at how far that single, careful discovery had carried them all. On quiet evenings, when her duties allowed, she still liked to stand at the viewport of Nightfall's command center, watching the stars, listening to the steady, patient hum of the ship's engines beneath her feet, the same engines that had once startled a small, curious survey team on a dead red planet, waking after 300 years of silence to prove, once and for all, that humanity had never truly been gone at all. It had simply been waiting for someone to come looking. And now, at long last, it was ready to be found.